Hello friends, in the series which we are doing on history of India from 1700 to 1950, today we are going to talk about the revolt of 1857, causes and consequences. The revolt of 1857 was one of the important reasons for that matter, where we find that how it was being used as an inspiration by the later nationalist movement. And there are a lot of contestations with regard to the nature of the revolt of 1857. Some scholars, they have called it as a Sepoy mutiny, initially the imperialist school, or for that matter European scholars, and then thereafter we find that it was also referred to as the first war of Indian independence by V.D. Savarkar and others. So in that particular framework, when we talk about the kind of causes which led to the revolt of 1857, we find that they can be categorized into economic, social, political, cultural. Military, which was considered to be the most important cause, where we find that the issue of greased cartridges was considered to be the immediate cause of the revolt of 1857. So when one is trying to understand these causes within the framework of the colonial rule, that how colonial rule was trying to throttle every Indian aspiration, and over a period of time various kinds of factors they led to the revolt because they were bottling up because of the colonial oppression. In that sense, when we also tend to understand the consequences, we find that a lot of changes came after the revolt of 1857 as the British Crown assumed the powers in India and East India Company's rule was done away with. And thereafter they also made a number of changes in administration as well as the military spheres. So when one is talking in this particular kind of a framework, then we find that these kinds of important concerns which were being talked about in the revolt of 1857. And when one is talking about the economic causes for that matter, we find that the way the various revenue settlements they were being introduced in India, and how all these revenue settlements, beginning from the permanent settlement, thereafter the Mahalvari, Raiyatvari, all of them, if we find that around 50% of the revenue was being taken by the colonial government. So in that way we find that the peasants, they suffered in every colonial settlement which was being undertaken. We also find that this was one of the factors, and apart from that, whether you see it in the framework of the commercialization of agriculture, because of which we find that so many peasants they suffered. And we find that that was also the period when we find that a number of famines in India and poverty was rampant, because British, they were largely concerned with their own economic resources, and they wanted to secure as many economic resources from India, and then they wanted to export those economic resources. So we find that this kind of a situation was not conducive for the Indians, and Indians, they were not getting any kind of economic benefit. Apart from that, we also see the issue of drain of wealth was also very important at that particular point of time, because we find that how the kind of home charges they were being taken away from India. We find that the salaries and the pensions of the officials of the East India Company, they were being paid from the Indian exchequer. So drain of wealth was another important concern, and we find that from the economic point of view, Indians, they were suffering from that particular perspective. We also see during this time that apart from the economic factors, if we talk about the political factors, in that sense the doctrine of Phillips was an important development during the times of Dalhousie. And we find that a number of states they were being annexed on different grounds, and before that also we have the subsidiary alliance system beginning from the rule of Wellesley, who became the Governor General. So we find that all this, when combined in the political sphere, a number of kingdoms of different rulers they were being annexed by the British in that sense, and we find that it also created that kind of a political situation which was not conducive from that point of view. We also see during this particular period that how military factors they were also in a way responsible, in the sense that we find that how the sepoys, they were not being given bhatta when they were going out of India. In that sense, if you see the invasions which they made in Punjab, so earlier, and how they annexed Sindh as well. So earlier, when Indian soldiers, they were going to these regions, they were being paid double bhatta. But now British, they were not paying any kind of bhatta to them, and how they treated the Indian soldiers, many of them, they were being referred to as pig or niggers. So this kind of a racial attitude of the British was another important aspect which was not liked by the Indians at all. And we find that if we see in the framework of trigger, then the issue of greased cartridges, where a new rifle was being introduced, a new Enfield rifle which was introduced, the cartridges were to be bitten by mouth. And these cartridges, we find that the beef, and that is the cow's fat and pig's fat, it was being used. So the soldiers, they now in a way sense believed that if they will use these greased cartridges, then they will lose their religion. So, and it was a true thing as well, because this is what was being done by the British. And when Indians they came to know about that this is the kind of a situation which is there, then they realized that British, they wanted to in a way defile the religion of the Indians. So in that sense, when we try to understand, or in a way try to locate the causes of the revolt of in a way 1857, then we find that such kind of concerns, especially the military concerns, which were also in a way linked to the religious issues as well. So they were paramount from the point of view of the sepoys, and sepoys, they felt that if British they want to defile their religion from that point of view, and they wanted to introduce these kinds of cartridges, and how the kind of mutiny which began from the sepoys, and how those sepoys, they came to Delhi and they took refuge in Delhi, and they proclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar as the king of Hindustan, in that sense, who is going to lead them. So all these kinds of things, they created such kind of a situation where we find that other sections of the society, they also joined the revolt. So this was an important concern of that particular period. And we also find that apart from the economic, we also find, apart from the military reasons, we also find that how the religious reasons were also very, very important. We find that at that point of time, how British, they were interfering in the religious context, where we find that some kind of legislations with regard to the old traditions and practices of India, they were being introduced by the British, whether it was sati or female or widow remarriage for that matter, which was not liked by certain sections of the society. They were ready to, in a way, reform themselves, and that is how we find that the socio-religious reform movements, they were being launched. So in that context, when we try to understand the situation, we find that such kind of an interference by the British was not liked by the Indians, and Indians, they in a way retaliated that their religion was in danger. Many times it has also been argued that the main lead in the revolt was initially taken by the sepoys, and then so many other sections of the society, they also joined the revolt. So in that sense, when we try to understand the various causes of the revolts and the way the historians, they have approached these causes, then we find that in terms of hierarchy of causes, the military cause or the issue of greased cartridges was an important concern. But at the same time, we also find that the other factors, they also chipped in, because Indians, they were not getting any kind of an opportunity in the jobs as well. And we find that the middle classes or the educated sections, they were in a way, though they were working under the British, but they were being employed at lower levels. They were given the jobs of the clerks, and even in the army, we find that the Indians, they could not go beyond the rank of a subedar. So from that point of view, we find that this kind of a racialism or this kind of a policy of racialism was followed by the British, which was not liked by the Indians, and we are not able to understand that when how these kinds of situation which emerged during that particular period led to all sorts of discontent among the various sections of the society. So when we tend to categorize these kinds of causes which were there during the revolt of 1857, be it political, be it economic, be it social, in that sense that how interventions they were being made by the British in the social sphere as well. Apart from that, we also see that cultural reasons, they were also very important in that sense, because we find that British, they felt they were superior to the Indians, and that is how in 1830s we find that they introduced English as a medium of instruction. And Macaulay, who is credited with the introduction of English education, he felt that Indians, they were corrupt in nature, and how their taste, their opinions, their morality and intellect is to be governed by the English education. So Indians, they should remain Indians only in the blood and color, and in their taste, opinion, morality and intellect they should be Europeans or British. So from that point of view, we find that when Indians, they will adopt the British methods or British ways, then they will be more pro or more accepting towards the things which were British in nature, and British culture will also be adopted by them in that sense. So we find that this idea of anglicizing the Indians was there in terms of bringing about cultural change in the lives of the Indians, and it was also not acceptable to many sections of the society, because they realized that how British, they were making interventions in their culture. And when we tend to understand the various other factors, though we argue that the military factor was an important concern, but apart from the military factors, we also find that other factors, they also chipped in, and they also definitely played an important role in the uprising of 1857. In terms of consequences, we find that how during this particular period, once the revolt was unsuccessful from the Indian point of view, and how British, they were able to quell the revolt of 1857, where we find that the rulers of Nabha, Patiala, Jind and other princely states, they supported the British. We also see that during this time, we find that there were others, those who supported the British, the zamindars. For that matter, Lord Canning, he argued that these zamindars, they acted as the breakwaters in the storm of 1857. So many elite section of the society, they in a way supported the British during this time, and we find that which led to the failure of the revolt of 1857. In terms of consequences, we also see that wholesale changes, they were being brought about in the administration, where we find that East India Company rule, it ended in 1857, and in 1858 we had the Queen's Proclamation, and with this Queen's Proclamation, the British Crown, it assumed the responsibility of India. And earlier we have seen that over a period of time, beginning from 1773 when the Regulating Act came, and thereafter the 1784 the Pitt's India Act, or from 1793 various charter acts, they were extending the rule of the company in India. They were giving charter to the company for every 20 years. And from 1793 we find that charter was given in 1813, charter was again given in 1833, though some kind of changes they were being brought about, where the privileges of company, they were being toned down, their trading privileges in the framework of the monopolies which they had, they were also being taken away at different points of time. And we find that in 1853 the charter was not given for another 20 years, rather it was being mentioned that this charter is for a specific for the period till the British Crown will decide. So in that sense there may be some kind of a simmering tension there, and at the same time the situation of India might have been aware, the Parliament and Crown must have been aware with regard to the kind of developments which have been happening in India. And this is how, when these kinds of changes came in 1858, we find that now the British Crown became the ruler of India. So it was an important development after the 1857 revolt, and we also see that the British Crown, now it made some kind of conciliatory approach towards the princes, because it realized that how princes and the zamindars they have supported the British during this time. So in that sense, if they are going to support them, then they will also get some kind of a future help from these rulers as well. So from the political point of view, that was one of the important developments. From the military point of view, we find that British they increased the number of European soldiers in India. Earlier we find that in the armies, the ratio of Indian soldiers was comparatively higher when it was being compared to the European and the British soldiers, but now that ratio was in a way decreased, because British, they realized that they needed to have more European and British soldiers in their ranks, and because they would not be able to in a way trust the Indians. And on the other hand, we also see that apart from this fact where they increased the number of European and the British soldiers, we also see that they kept the important departments in the European hands. For example, artillery was one important department which was being kept by the British in their own hands, where Indians will not have any kind of a say. So these kinds of changes in that sense which came during this particular period, and we also find that when one is talking about the kind of consequences with regard to the failure of the revolt, we find that how the people, those who were rebelling, the people, those who were known as rebels, it has been argued by some of the scholars that they did not have a forward-looking program. Rather, their revolt or movement was more restorative in nature, because they wanted to, in a way, place the Mughal emperor on the throne. So this lack of an ideology or this kind of a forward-looking program in the hands of the rebel was considered to be one of the reasons for their downfall or the decline as well. We also, in a way, argue that the kind of men and material which was available with the British was comparatively far more superior, because they had the Indian resources at their disposal. On the other hand, Indians, they were fighting with bow and arrows, they were fighting with the sticks. They did not have any kind of modern weapons, they did not have any kinds of arms and ammunitions with which to match the British army in that sense, which was in a way fighting against them now. And the various kinds of reinforcements which were sought by the British in the framework that they had this kind of money to get the men and material was a total handicap from the framework of the sepoys. We also see that apart from these kinds of things, we also find that was also a period where we find that some of the scholars, they have argued that India was still not a nation. But it has also been argued by others that the idea of nation in the modern sense only came in the 18th century, and even Italy and Germany, they did not become nations in that sense before 1871, when we find the unification of Italy and Germany happens. So these kinds of notions with regard to the nation, they have been argued by some of the scholars, and how we also see that when you are trying to identify or try to create the kind of hierarchy of causes, then we can understand the revolt of 1857 in the framework of the long-term causes and the short-term causes, where we find that the issues concerning military, they were short-term in nature, in the sense that the issue of greased cartridges was very immediate in nature. And on the other hand, we find that the economic causes and the religious causes, they could be considered in the framework of the long-term causes as well, because religious causes was in the framework of the religious and the cultural interference which was made by the British. But at the same time, when we see the issue of greased cartridges, it was also closely related to religion, and how both the Muslims and the Hindus, both of them, they felt that they are going to lose the religion if they will be in the British army. And we have also seen that how the British treatment of the Indian soldiers, it created the situation where the Indian soldiers had revolted earlier as well. Vellore mutiny could also be understood in the sense that in 1806 sepoys of Mysore, Vellore, they also in a way revolted against the British, because a number of changes were to be brought about in their dress and the accompanying their dress and the accompanying material. So we find that they felt that the kind of dress which was imposed on the sepoys was trying to in a way defile their religion, because that dress was not in consonance with their religious practices. So we find that these sepoys, they revolted there, and we also have instances. Mangal Pandey, for example, he also revolted even before the revolt of 1857. So we have numerous kinds of instances where we find that sepoys, they were not happy with the various kinds of laws or the functioning of the colonial army, and in that sense they revolted at different points of time. And 1857 provided that kind of a trigger, because we find that the issue of greased cartridges provided that kind of a spark, where the long term as well as the short term causes, they came together. And many a times it has also been argued that it was just a sepoy mutiny for that matter, but we also have to understand that various sections of the society, they participated in the revolt of 1857. And if British, they only considered it as a mutiny, as they have argued, then why so many civilians in the different regions of India, they were being punished by the British? Why it has been seen that it has been argued that no tree in Delhi was left where someone who had not been hanged by the British. So such kind of a treatment which was given to the general population by the British was totally against the kind of theory which they have propounded. So in a way we can understand the popular character of the revolt of 1857, where we find that people from the different sections of the society, they participated in the revolt and brought about a lot of changes in that context. So we find that when we try to discuss these kinds of causes within the context of the colonial policy, we find that the colonial policy was making all sorts of inroads into the lives of the Indians, whether we see that how the tribals from different regions, they were being in a way, their lives were being intruded, the subsistence economy of the tribals, it was being trampled upon by the British by capturing more and more forest areas for themselves. So we'll continue further in our next lecture. Thank you very much.